Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The clatter of my cleaning cart echoed through the empty hallways of Ocean of Possibilities. It was still early, too early for anyone important to be in. I liked it that way. In the quiet, I could move through the office unnoticed, wiping down desks, scrubbing floors, and polishing the glass walls that framed the impressive skyline of the city. I wasn't supposed to be noticed anyway. To them, I was just Antonia, the cleaning lady, a fixture in the background, someone whose name they barely remembered. Every day, I passed through the halls like a shadow. I heard everything but said nothing. That was my role, silent, invisible, and underestimated. Today was no different, except I had an uneasy feeling as I entered the executive boardroom. Maybe it was the knowledge that they were gearing up for some big meeting, or maybe it was just the sight of Thomas Patterson, already seated at the far end of the long glass table, scrolling through his phone. I kept my head down, pushing the mop across the floor in smooth, even strokes, praying he wouldn't notice me. But of course, he did. "Antonia," he called out, not looking up from his phone, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you clean those windows last night? They look streaky again. We can't afford to have this place look like a mess when the board arrives." I clenched my jaw, pausing mid-stroke. I had cleaned the windows twice yesterday, but there was no point in arguing with him. Thomas Patterson, with his sharp suits and sharper tongue, was one of those men who never saw beyond his own importance. He lived in a world where people like me didn't matter. "Yes, Mr. Patterson," I said quietly, moving toward the windows once more. "I'll take care of them again." Behind me, I could hear him chuckling, probably texting something smug to his colleagues. I could imagine the message. "The cleaning lady's at it again. Thinks she runs the place." I pressed the rag harder against the glass, willing the tension to flow out with each swipe. It wasn't just Thomas, it was all of them. The executives in their pristine suits, the polished smiles, the way they floated around the office like they owned the world. No one ever saw me beyond the uniform, beyond the mop and bucket. As I wiped the last of the smudges from the window, Thomas stood up, adjusting his jacket. His reflection in the glass smirked at me. "Make sure it's spotless, Antonia. The board's a tough crowd." I nodded stiffly, not trusting myself to speak. He sauntered out, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and arrogance. My hands shook as I wrung out the cloth, the quiet rage building up inside me once again. Every day, I swallowed my pride. Every day, I watched them act like gods in a kingdom they barely understood. But I knew this company better than anyone. I'd been here longer than most of them. I'd seen CEOs come and go, each with grand promises that fizzled out within a few years. I knew their dirty secrets, their backroom deals, their whispered conversations about who would rise and who would fall. They thought I was invisible, but I wasn't. I was waiting. As I packed up my cart and headed toward the next room, a voice behind me startled me. "Antonia." I turned to see Heidi Baker, the newest addition to the administrative staff. She was young, fresh-faced, and still full of optimism, something rare around here. Unlike the others, Heidi always greeted me with a smile. Today was no different, but her brow was furrowed with concern. "I heard Patterson giving you a hard time again," she said softly, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" I gave her a tired smile, trying to brush it off. "It's nothing I'm not used to." Heidi shook her head. "It's not right. You deserve better than that." "Maybe," I replied, pushing the cart forward, "but it doesn't matter. Not to people like him." She hesitated, biting her lip. "One day, they're going to realize they've been underestimating you. I just know it." The boardroom hummed with tension. Executives filed in, exchanging polite nods, their conversations quiet but charged with the anticipation of whatever big announcement was about to be made. The CEO, Douglas Ryan, stood at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor masking whatever storm was brewing behind his eyes. I was in the corner, as always, cleaning up the remains of the morning's coffee break. My presence barely registered in their minds, a blur of movement, a pair of hands collecting empty cups and crumpled napkins. As I worked, I could feel the weight of the meeting building, the whispers between board members growing more conspiratorial. Thomas Patterson walked in last, smirking as if the whole show had been arranged for his benefit. He didn't even glance in my direction as he took his seat near the CEO, leaning back with an air of superiority. He caught the eye of another executive and gave a knowing wink. I didn't have to hear him to know he was making another joke at my expense. Douglas cleared his throat, the room falling silent almost instantly. He looked down at the papers in front of him, took a deep breath, and then glanced around the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Douglas began, his voice steady but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "As you all know, we're here today to discuss the future of Ocean of Possibilities. It's been a challenging few quarters, and we need to make some major decisions regarding the direction of this company." The executives nodded in agreement, their eyes locked on the CEO, waiting for him to lay out the next steps. Thomas leaned forward, confident as ever. "Douglas, whatever changes you've got planned, I'm sure we're all eager to hear. We've been making strong moves under your leadership." Douglas didn't smile. Instead, he paused for a beat, his gaze flickering toward me for the briefest of moments. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly looked down, focusing on wiping the edge of the table. "Why is he looking at me?" "Well," Douglas said, his voice suddenly sharper, "there is one particular change we haven't discussed yet, something I've kept under wraps until now." A murmur spread through the room. Executives shifted in their seats, intrigued but wary. Thomas's smirk faltered ever so slightly. Douglas straightened his shoulders, and without missing a beat, said, "Before we move any further, I'd like to introduce the company's majority shareholder, Antonia Wall." For a moment, the room froze, everyone blinking in confusion, including Thomas, who looked around as if waiting for a punchline. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. Did he just say my name? I stood there, rag in hand, every eye in the room suddenly on me. What did you just say?" Thomas stammered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Douglas nodded toward me. "Antonia Wall, the cleaning lady you've been so dismissive of. She's the majority shareholder of this company." The room erupted into whispers, some of the executives glancing between me and Douglas, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Thomas's face had gone pale, his smug expression dissolving into shock. I swallowed hard, willing myself to breathe. Slowly, I straightened up, meeting Thomas's stunned gaze. He blinked, completely thrown off. "Is this some kind of joke?" he demanded, his voice rising. "She can't be the majority shareholder." Douglas raised a hand, silencing the room. "It's no joke, Thomas. Antonia has held the majority of shares for over a decade. She's been quietly observing, biding her time, and now she's ready to take her place at the table." I could feel the tension crackling through the air, a current of disbelief and resentment swirling around me. The power dynamics in the room had shifted in an instant, and the man who had mocked me for years now stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Thomas stood, hands braced on the table, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "This is ridiculous. We can't just let a cleaning lady call the shots." I took a step forward, my hands no longer shaking. For the first time, I spoke up, my voice steady and clear. "I may be the cleaning lady, Mr. Patterson, but I'm also the one who holds the most power here. And as of today, things are going to change around here." The boardroom remained eerily quiet after my words. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath, like the world itself had stopped for a moment. Thomas Patterson, still standing, was frozen mid-motion, his jaw clenched tightly, eyes narrowing as he tried to process the truth that had just shattered his carefully constructed world. but I felt none of the trembling nerves I'd expected. Instead, there was a calmness in me, an odd sense of control as I straightened my spine and locked eyes with Thomas. I was no longer the invisible woman with a rag in her hand. I was the majority shareholder, and the time had come for those who had treated me as less than human to face the consequences. Thomas's voice broke the silence, sharp and venomous. "This is outrageous. You're not qualified to be in this room, let alone." "Sit down, Thomas," I interrupted, my voice firm but quiet. There was no need to raise it. Every syllable seemed to ripple through the tension. "I've listened to your disrespect for years, and I won't tolerate it any longer." He didn't move, still rigid, staring at me as if I had just stolen everything he'd ever worked for. "I've given my life to this company." His hands balled into fists. "You think you can just waltz in here, throw your weight around, and undo everything?" I took a step forward, my heels clicking against the cold marble floor, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Thomas, your arrogance and disrespect are exactly why this company has started to falter. You've been treating everyone beneath you as expendable." My gaze swept the room, lingering on each executive. "That stops today. We're not going any further with you." Thomas's fists unclenched, and for a moment, he seemed to realize he had lost control. His tone softened, but it was laced with condescension. "Antonia, you don't understand how things work at this level. There are complexities you wouldn't be able to." "Complexities?" I cut in, raising an eyebrow. "You mean like how you belittle the staff, exploit workers, and overlook talent because it doesn't come dressed in a suit?" I shook my head slowly, feeling years of frustration spill out in words I had never been able to say. "I understand more than you give me credit for, Thomas." Douglas remained silent at the head of the table, watching the scene unfold. His hands were folded, but his expression carried approval, even a hint of pride. It was clear that he had been waiting for this day, waiting for me to claim what had been mine all along. "Antonia," Thomas said, his voice now shaking with desperation, "you can't just fire me. I've been with Ocean of Possibilities for over 2 decades. The board." "I don't need the board's approval," I said, cutting him off. "As majority shareholder, I have the authority to make personnel decisions, and as of this moment, you are no longer employed here." The room was still, the weight of my words sinking in. "What?" His voice broke, disbelief etched on his face. "You can't." "I can, and I just did." I took another step forward, my gaze locked on his. "Pack your things, Thomas. Security will escort you out." There was a gasp from one of the executives, but no one dared speak. The power dynamics had shifted irreversibly, and even those who had once aligned themselves with Thomas remained seated, their eyes cast downward, unwilling to challenge me. Thomas stumbled backward, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. For a brief moment, he looked like he might argue, might fight back, but then he seemed to deflate. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. I turned to face the rest of the executives, feeling a strange sense of clarity. This company will not survive if we continue on this path of arrogance and entitlement. From this day forward, we will rebuild the culture of Ocean of Possibilities, one of respect, inclusivity, and innovation. Douglas nodded in agreement, standing up at last. "You heard her," he said to the room. "The winds of change are here. Adapt or be left behind."